All right, 12 p.m. Welcome to the webinar, Changes to Soil Relocation in British Columbia and What That Means for You, presented by Travis Deeter. Now, Travis has over 20 years experience working in contaminated sites, including residential, commercial, and industrial sites within BC, Yukon, and the Northwest Territories. He has been involved in large infrastructure projects, chemical spill cleanups, large-scale developments, environmental monitoring programs, and numerous transactional due diligence investigations, many of which have resulted in obtaining Ministry of Environmental Regulatory instruments. Travis has successfully assisted clients in relocating large volumes of soil during site improvement and development projects. He is a numerical standard specialist with the Society of Contaminated Sites Approved Professionals of BC. And today's webinar is hosted by PhilConnect, the dirt exchange platform, where you can save time, money, and the environment by collaborating with nearby project sites that need fill or have fill. PhilConnect allows you to view nearby projects on an easy-to-use interactive map, filter by location, quantity, and type of fill, and upload and download supporting files related to your project. And the webinar is sponsored by Magnas Media, a communication design agency here in Vancouver. We help our clients in the public and private sector with their branding, corporate websites, and sales presentations. And our mission is to help you communicate and magnify your business value in the marketplace. On the call with us today, we also have Mana Arabi, CEO and co-founder of PhilConnect. As a civil engineer with over 20 years of experience, Mana has worked on many private and public projects in Canada and the United States for prominent companies such as Dragado, SNC-Lavalin, Norland, Lafarge, Eurovia, and North Constructions, as well as myself, Hwayda Kater, founder of Magnas Media, and I will be your moderator today. Now, before I pass the presentation over to Travis, please be mindful of the background noise. We are recording the webinar, so there will be a recording and we will be addressing the questions at the end of the webinar. So if you have any questions, please add them to the Q&A section, and Travis will be addressing them at the end of the webinar, and then you can put on your audio if applicable. So I'll pass it over to you, Travis. Please go ahead.
Great, thanks, Hwayda. I'm just going to restart this slideshow here because it's not changing slides for me. Hopefully that all showed all right while you were doing that.
Yeah, it was changing for us.
It was changing there? Yeah. Okay, well, hopefully it'll work now. That looks better for me. Is that looking okay? See the outline? All right. So thanks everyone for joining us today. So we're here to talk about soil relocation and what's coming down the pipeline here early next year. So the outline for our talk today, we're going to look over the Ministerial Order 164, which is the actual legislation that enacts the Stage 14 amendments of the Contaminated Sites Regulation. We'll go over the final soil relocation process, what that's going to look like, some anticipated challenges that I'd like everyone to be aware of, and then we'll slide into a Q&A session at the end. All right, so here we go. Ministerial Order. So this formally enacts the Stage 14 amendments, of which soil relocation is the main component. They come into force March 1st, 2023. That is a hard date. It is happening. So we all just got to try and get ready for it. So what's in this Ministerial Order? We've got our regulation triggers. That we do actually have the notification form, so we're going to have a look at that. We now know what it takes to become a high volume receiving site and the registration information, clarification of how soil quality works with high volume receiving sites, and what are the exemptions if you don't have to file a notification or if you don't have to be considered a high volume receiving site. But I will just warn you, we don't have all the answers here. There is still, unfortunately, some uncertainty out there. So notification, nothing has changed really from that previous final policy paper. We've got Schedule 2 activities. If you have that and you're moving 30 or more cubic meters of soil, you will have to file a notification onto the system. And just a little refresher, what is Schedule 2? This is an actual document within the Contaminated Sites Regulation that basically lists some high-risk activities, what the ministry considers high-risk activities. There's 89 Schedule 2 uses divided into 9 categories. So what does this notification look like? So it still requires 1 week prior to soil relocation submission. Okay, you have to get that in. That's your hard deadline. You can file it before that. There's spots on the form for your dates, but it has to be at least 1 week before you're going to move soil. What are the exemptions from having to file that notification? If you're not moving 30 cubic meters on a single project, if your receiving site is outside BC, or if it's federal property other than First Nations reserves, they are included in this legislation. If you're a low impact land use, essentially residential, park, wildlands, or if you're a gravel quarry, similar site with a permit under the Mines Act, you are exempt from filing a notification. Preload material, winter maintenance sand, also exempt from filing notifications. So we do have the notification form. I thought it would be worthwhile just to quickly go through that. I'll be blasting through some of the more generic parts of it. Hopefully this opens all right. That did when we tried this before. That looked good. Everyone can see that. Let me know if you can't. Otherwise, we'll just start going through it. So here's the notification form. So I assume this is going to be on just a website. You're not actually going to download this and fill it out. It'll be through a website, automatically uploaded onto the new registry that's going to be created. And so it basically just goes through, first of all, are you a Schedule 2 use? Make sure you are in the system before you bother filing this out. So it asks that right at the start. A lot of this is very generic information as far as the source site where you're sending it. They want to know who the owner is, address, contact information, where is your actual site located, who on the site can the ministry contact if they want clarification for anyone. Here's your coordinates. They want lat and longs there. You do have to file an actual land title for that source site. That has to be included along with all this information. Again, just some very generic stuff here. So now they want to know, well, what is your source site used for? So here's where you would actually list your Schedule 2 activities that have occurred and have got you into this system. Are you a high-risk site? Probably not if you're using this system. What's the purpose of the excavation and relocation of the soil? They want to know that. How is it currently stored? Is it still in the ground? Is it in stockpiles? And here's where you're going to talk about what's your quality is. So this gets into the assessment part that we're going to talk about later. What are your quality of soil? How did you get that information? And you do need to attach the soil analytical data. Little nuance here. It does not say you have to attach an actual report when you file this notification. They just want the data. So that might make things a little quicker, easier, cheaper maybe to get that information onto the registry. Vapour, soil vapor is a part of this new process, and we'll dive more into that later. But that also is on here. How did you get it? Attach your vapor analytical data. Here's your start date. When do you anticipate starting it? Again, must be 1 week before. When do you think you're going to complete it? I think there's a lot more wiggle room on the end date. If that slips or changes, I don't think they care too much about that, as long as you filed it 1 week before you started. And how are you moving it? So this is a little more, this might be a little more work coming up here. Receiving site information. They basically want all the same information for the receiving site as they do for a source site. So that means you are going to have to be speaking with your fill site operators continuously to get information like who owns the property. You're going to have to get a land title of that property, just the same as you do for the source site. Down all the same information. This part right here at the bottom, I want to draw the attention to. You have to attach a site location map of the receiving site and the location the soil will be deposited on that site. So again, you're going to have to get some information from that fill site in order to do this. So a little bit of legwork is going to be required. It's probably not something you're going to be able to fill out right at that 1 week before you want to move the soil. It's going to take some preparation. Again, just some legal information here that they want. And then here's your receiving site. What land use standards apply there? It's including what site-specific factors apply at your receiving site. What are you going to use that relocated soil for? And then just a couple of tick boxes down here to go over. One thing I do like about this form is that they have allowed you to list multiple receiving sites in the same notification. So this was something we talked about last time, was the concern that what happens if you have to switch fill sites? Well, as long as you have some fill sites in mind, and again, you can get all that information from those alternative fill sites, then you can list them on here. And so you could switch from one fill site to another within the same notification as long as they were specified on this form. And there's spots for 2. So that's why I'm blasting through here, is because they're just duplicated information. What's the additional receiving site? What are you going to use it for? Who owns it? And then there's a spot for the second receiving site here. So that's all that I just skipped over. So now we get to the end. Who can fill out this form? It has to be a qualified professional. So a qualified professional, such as myself, other consultants, they're going to be putting their names on here, signing that they agree with how the soil and vapor was characterized and that all the information on here is correct. And then they're going to be signing their name and filing this on behalf of the shipper of the soil. All right, so that's the notification form. And now hopefully we can just slide back into the PowerPoint. Hopefully that looks okay. All right, moving on. Assessment. So what level of assessment is going to be required? Who can do it? When should you be doing this? So there's a little bit of a change from the policy paper. Technical guidance document 1, that's kind of our main handbook for how we investigate contaminated sites. And the ministry had said they were going to be updating that to include some new information about how to assess for soil relocation, since it's not technically supposed to be contaminated. What they've instead decided to do is create a brand new site investigation protocol that is going to encompass all sorts of investigation, both for contaminated sites and uncontaminated sites and for soil relocation. So the first part of the SIP is going to be devoted to soil relocation, but according to the ministry, we are not going to see that document until March 1st. So that does make trying to get some of this assessment done in advance a little challenging, and it's going to require some guesswork. Sampling frequency. So this is only one part of the assessment, is this frequency of how many samples per how many cubic meters of soil are you moving. There's also going to be things like, if you're investigating a site, how far apart are your boreholes allowed to be? How many samples can you take from one particular borehole? Are there going to be limits on that? That's the type of information we're expecting to be in the SIP, and which also makes it a bit challenging to do work right now. So this is not actually in the ministerial order, these tables. This is from the final policy paper, but everything we've heard is that these frequencies are going to stay the same. So this is basically what you've got: in situ sampling frequency and ex situ, meaning stockpile, if it's in that area or that form. So who can do it? It's not specifically stated that only a qualified professional can do the assessment work. However, we just saw you have to have a QP sign your notification form. That QP has to be satisfied that the work was done properly. It's typically going to mean you're going to need a QP to do that work for you. When should you be doing this? I think in most cases, it's going to be more advantageous to do it while the soil's still in the ground. I think it's going to be cheaper, and it's also going to be, alert you to any issues in advance. The last thing you want is your excavation stuck because you've just found out the soil you want to ship is contaminated or doesn't meet the requirements. Now, I just put a couple of examples in here to kind of back that up. This is based on the frequency table. So if you're doing it in situ, 10,000 cubic meters, you're looking at 50 samples. And if you're doing the same in stockpile, you'd be doing 59 samples. And those discrepancies only get bigger with the increased size of an excavation. So again, I think you're best to do it while it's still in the ground. So let's look at how soil vapor works here. So just a little recap of soil vapor with this graphic here. What's the concern here? Contamination comes out of a tank or something, volatile contamination. So we're looking at hydrocarbons, solvents, that kind of thing, something that's going to volatilize. That contaminant then does volatilize into the soil, the unsaturated soil, and starts making its way up to the surface. And eventually it could get into a building or something. Now, the biggest problem that we're going to see with soil vapor is that raw concentrations of soil vapor, when it's in the ground, can be quite high. They can exceed standards just on its own. However, we're not worried about what it is in the ground. We're worried about what it is in the breathing space around us. And so the ministry, when vapor started to be investigated, created vapor attenuation factors. These are basically very small numbers that you multiply your vapor data by to say, oh, it's going to diffuse or dissipate by this much, because it's going through a concrete slab or because it's traveling up through meters of soil. Unfortunately, they are not allowing us to use those vapor attenuation factors when it comes to soil relocation. So this means that we're just going to be looking at those raw numbers. And if you have raw numbers that exceed a standard, then your vapor, that soil is going to be considered contaminated for the purpose of soil relocation. So this is one of the big issues that I see coming up with sites, and we'll just have to see how it plays out in reality, and whether the ministry gives us some leeway on it. So just a couple of case studies here to look at how soil vapor can affect things. These are recent investigations we've done within the last year. Here's a strip mall, Vancouver Island active gas station. We put in 4 vapor probes. All 4 of those probes had raw exceedances for at least one parameter, and most had several. Again, the soil was non-detect in all 4 boreholes. So that's a big part of this, is trying to figure out when do we absolutely have to look at soil vapor. And the rules state that if your soil, there's 2 different legs here. There's solvents and then there's hydrocarbons. So chlorinated solvents, basically what comes from dry cleaners for the most part. If your soil is non-detect for chlorinated solvents, then you don't have to consider soil vapor. As far as hydrocarbons or other types of volatile components, if those are at least below your residential land use standard, the vapor, then in soil, I should say, then you don't have to consider vapor. So it's 2 different things. Soil is going to play a big role. As you can see here, soil was non-detect in all these boreholes, and we still had vapor exceedances. The second case study is the same thing. It was just a tire change facility, used to be auto repair. That's why the work was done. 2 vapor probes. Both probes had exceedances for at least one of these things. And again, soil samples from both boreholes were non-detect. So there's 2 ways to look at this. You know, you're probably saying, oh, okay, well then it looks like in most cases soil will be non-detect and I don't have to worry about vapor. And that's true. However, most of these sites, or a lot of these sites, are already going to have existing vapor data on them. And so that's a big question mark, is how much do we have to consider historical investigations and historical vapor data in how we're categorizing these sites for soil relocation? Can we just resample those vapor probes? Is that actually going to give us a better result? Can we ignore them and just say, no, we're just focusing on soil and we're only going to do vapor if that soil, the new soil results, have detections? We don't know those answers yet. So again, that's why I think vapor is going to be a bit of a headache as we work through this. And if we don't have any allowances for it, then what are we doing? Are we trying to delineate these raw vapor hits? Is this just going to make soil stuck at these sites? Again, unfortunately, not a lot of answers on that one. Let's look at some costs of this assessment. Hypothetical excavation. So here's quite a large shopping center redevelopment, 5-level underground parkade, 500,000 cubic meters of soil requiring disposal. So based on that final policy paper, we're going to need a total of 347 samples. That's one thing I didn't mention there. Those 3 levels of volumes, probably just worth quickly going back and looking at it. Those 3 different frequencies, you are looking at each one of those. So it's not like, oh, I have a 50,000 cubic meter in situ investigation, so I'm only doing 1 sample per 2,000. No, for the first 10,000, you're doing 1 sample per 200. Into 40,000, you're doing 1 sample per 450. And then after that, you get to move to a decreased frequency. So if we look back at this, we're analyzing a total of 347 samples based on that. Again, here's what I talked about before. We don't know how many boreholes that's going to need. We don't know how many samples per borehole we're going to be allowed to take. So here I've assumed 5 samples per borehole. In simple math, that means we need 70 boreholes on a site to meet that frequency. So some of these larger excavations are going to be requiring a lot of assessment in advance. Those costs look like some rough numbers here. They could certainly go up or down. I've said 150,000. That's with a solid stem auger. You need sonic. You're in some challenging soils, so you can easily add another 30 to 40,000 on top of that. So not insignificant costs here for assessment. Of course, they're going to be cheaper for smaller excavations, but there's still going to be a floor that you're going to be looking at for spending money on assessment. So before we look into high volume receiving sites, I just wanted to do a quick review of kind of what the standards are that we're working with here. There has been some helpful changes, I think, as far as just how much soil is going to have to go to high volume receiving sites or go there. So I want you to pay attention to the middle part of this table, specifically the high density residential and commercial quality soil. Okay? So those are kind of the main area we're focusing on as far as high volume receiving sites go. So what are we looking at here? We've got our final details. We know what the registration form is. We've kind of come up with a new term. A colleague of mine that I gave a presentation with used it, Goldilocks soil. I think it's very appropriate here as we look through this. And what are my takeaways from high volume receiving sites? So if you are a fill site operator and you're thinking about becoming a high volume receiving site or worried about becoming a high volume receiving site, your trigger is still that 20,000 cubic meters of soil from specific Schedule 2 sites and of specific quality, right? So it's only that quality of soil, that Goldilocks soil, that you have to count against your 20,000 cubic meters. And so that is anything that is above a low impact land use, so it exceeds the low impact land use, is below CL and IL. So this low impact land use is a new term, and it is pretty all encompassing as far as low impact. It's everything from wildlands, agricultural, park, and then both low and high density residential. And that's kind of the change from the policy paper, is that they have included high density residential, which is quite helpful. So what are your exemptions from having to be considered a high volume receiving site? So there's exemptions for many types of infrastructure uses, which I've listed there, because that was a big comment from large ministries, Ministry of Transportation, groups like BC Hydro, large operators who sometimes need to take a lot of soil for infrastructure uses. So it looks like that's certainly a very helpful list of exemptions for those operators. If you do want to become a high volume receiving site, what do you need to do? You have to have a soil management plan. That soil management plan has to be developed by a qualified professional. It has to be approved by someone like me, an approved professional. Those can't be the same person. So I can't approve a plan that I've done myself. Someone else would have to do up that plan. You have to have procedures for detailed tracking of the soil. Where is it going on your site? What was the quality? Where did it come from? You're going to have to install a groundwater monitoring network and do seasonal groundwater monitoring. Have your closure plan for when your high volume receiving site is going to be done. And then you'll be registered on a public database as well. So this form is much shorter. Let's just take a quick look at it. So who's your receiving site owner and operator? Again, all that same information we saw from the previous form. They want that. A contact person on the site. Where is your site location, latitude, longitude, and then attach a map of your site and boundaries. So in this case, because you're registering, you're not showing where the soil is going. It's kind of assumed that that's included in your soil management plan. Who owns it? Attach your land title. And then what's your use? What's your receiving site primary land use? What are the factors that apply at it? And then here's you're confirming that you are a receiving site and you're accepting this type of soil. And when did that happen? When are you registering? Are you going to use that relocated soil? And then just a couple of tick boxes to fill out as well. And then just the same qualified professional information. So it's a pretty quick form really for registering, but it does assume that you have already done all of this other information. You've already got your soil management. That's basically what you're signing here. You're saying, yes, this has all been done and I'm ready to register as a high volume receiving site. Okay. Now, I mentioned something called Goldilocks soil. So this is a very important point, and I think it actually could have a big impact on just how many sites decide to go for a high volume receiving site. So again, a high volume receiving site is kind of this middle ground of, it's not a permitted treatment facility for contaminated sites, but it's also not a clean fill site only taking residential quality soil. So you're in that group between high density residential and commercial, right? But the problem is the way that we look at standards in BC is that we have these site-specific factors that can apply at all types of land use. And drinking water is probably the biggest one, but then after that, aquatic life, freshwater, and marine standards are also there. So it could be a couple of different things. This is just one example. Arsenic, it's one of the most pervasive and troublesome metals that we see all across just because it's such naturally occurring at higher levels. So you see here that drinking water standard is 10. So for when you're evaluating arsenic, either you're clean or you're not. You're either meeting residential and wildlands or you're contaminated. There is no in between. So in this case, soil like could not even go to a high volume receiving site. And that situation plays out in numerous scenarios. So here we just have a list. These are just the basic metals that we all test for. I think that's probably going to be the main parameter that we're concerned about when we're evaluating soil for soil relocation. And you can see it's quite a long list where there is no change between the high density residential standard standard and the commercial standard, mainly because of that drinking water pathway. And that's a lot of very common metals in there. So really, you're either clean or you're not. There's just a few. So maybe if you've got a site that had some minor lead impacts that push you above that high density, sure, there might be some soil there that could go to a high volume receiving site rather than a permitted treatment facility. And this situation plays out with other parameters, hydrocarbons, solvents. There's some parameters that change and some that don't. So it is going to impact just how much soil goes to high volume receiving sites. What's my takeaway from that? Well, there's a few of them. I think start with the last one. Bright spot, it might not be a bottleneck. I think we were all worried about you're not going to have anywhere to send your soil. You're a Schedule 2 use, so your soil can only go to these high volume receiving sites. And really, it's looking like that's not going to be such a big deal, in that a lot of soil is just either going to be straight up clean and can go wherever, or it's going to be dirty and have to go to a permitted facility anyways, just like it does now. So those are really my main takeaways, that it just might not be that big a deal. There's going to be significant cost to register and maintain. So knowing that, how many fill sites are going to go through this route, I'm not sure. We'll just have to see how that goes. So that's the high volume receiving site section. And so now we'll go through the anticipated challenges. Lack of assessment protocol. I think this is going to be a big one, mainly for all those developers and contractors who want to get a jump on this and want to try and get their ducks in a row before March 1st. That's going to make it difficult for people like me to give you a guaranteed answer as to what's required. We can use our best guesses and base some of it. We might have to be a little more conservative until we see that information, if you do want to get going on those jobs before March 1st. Now, the ministry has said that they're going to hold some webinars in December 14th and 15th. You can find registration information for those on the land remediation website. So I'd suggest, if you're interested in attending those webinars, please go there and register, or you can contact me or the Fill Connect crew, and we can put you in touch with those registration links as well. But the ministry has said they will be providing some information. We don't know what that looks like. I don't know if it's going to be specific enough for us to design work plans. If it's just going to be some general comments and take questions, I don't know. But I'll certainly be tuning into those. And if there are any large changes, we'll be putting up a blog post about that. Potential for significant delay costs. If your fill sites are not available, that risk is still there. So yes, you can put multiple fill sites on the registration or the notification form, but that doesn't guarantee that those 3 fill sites that are on there, your soil at that point, I know. So you will have a delay if you can't stick with those fill sites and you have to file a new notification. There just doesn't seem to be any way around that. Driller availability. I'm interested to see what that looks like. It's just a potential concern. It might not amount to much. It really depends on how many soil relocation assessments are necessary right away. We know there's a lot of work going on in the region right now, between still doing some flood repairs and assessments and pipeline work, and then just our general development and construction industry here. So drillers are in demand now, and they are going to be in more demand coming up. What if we identify naturally occurring, variability especially with metals, right? We looked at arsenic as one issue. They're all can be problems. And when you're taking big excavation, 350 samples, even if you're only taking 50 samples, there's a good bet you're going to get one metal parameter in there that exceeds its standard. And so then what are we doing? Are we allowed to use statistics? I've certainly had personal experiences where fill sites were not comfortable with statistics. They saw a value that exceeded and they said, no, we don't want that soil. You need to remediate that soil before we'll take it. I'm really hopeful that the ministry can provide some comfort in that term, because it is going to become a big issue when you're taking that many samples and they're all being tested for metals. And metals is the big one that I'm concerned about. We're going to get hits. And so then what are we doing about that? Are we really going to be delineating that? What happens when that's at 30 feet down? When you've got clean above and clean below and clean beside, it could get really complicated. So again, I'm really hoping that site investigation protocol has some help in that manner, what to do with those random hits. And then, of course, soil vapor, and that's probably the one I'm worried about the most because it is very difficult to handle with these rock exceedances. There's a lot of thought in the industry that rock exceedances come just from drilling itself. Just the act of drilling can cause vapors to get down into that hole, get trapped in the soil, and then you're sampling that. So, at a bare minimum, certainly leave as much time as you can between when you install your vapor probes and when you are doing your vapor sampling to try and allow any of those potential anomalies from drilling to just work their way out. And that's the main presentation. So I think we're probably a little bit ahead of schedule there. Yeah, but we got lots of time to talk about it and take questions and answers now.
Thank you, Travis. That was great. Lots of good information. I see one question here, but before I ask that question, I just want to clarify something. All these new rules are not for contaminated site. Nothing has changed for contaminated site, and nothing has changed for clean RL, agricultural quality. So this is kind of in between Schedule 2 that all these new changes, right?
Yes and no, because it's not so much about what the quality of your soil is. It's more, that initial trigger is just, are you a Schedule 2 land use? So you might be a Schedule 2 land use and your soil is pristine, but you're still going to have to go through the soil assessment process. You're still going to have to file that notification if you are indeed a Schedule 2 land use.
So it's potential that it could be contaminated.
Yeah, that's the worry, right? Is that there's a higher risk that, something could have been missed during a due diligence assessment or previous investigations. And so the ministry is saying, well, there's a higher risk there, so we want more assessment done.
Yeah. And some of the examples are, like you mentioned, there's a strip mall. There used to be a dry cleaning there, auto shop, and etc.
Yeah. So those are all, and so that, the strip mall with the gas station, that is a Schedule 2 land use. And, that's an interesting point in that it's not just the gas station that's a Schedule 2 land use. That gas station is just sitting on the same legal parcel as the rest of the mall. Then that whole mall is considered to have a Schedule 2 use. Schedule 2 uses are typically done by legal boundaries. So same with, if you've got a dry cleaner, one tiny dry cleaner suite in the middle of a huge shopping center, that whole shopping center is going to have to go through that soil assessment process. It's not just the area of the dry cleaner that's going to have to be assessed. So,
whereas before, if they did the test and it wasn't contaminated, then that material could go anywhere.
That's right. Yeah, because there just weren't really any provincial regulations. So there might have still been some municipal requirements for moving soil that you'd have to live by, and you're still going to have to live by those now. Those haven't gone away. But before, you're right, there wouldn't have been any notification. If the soil was clean, if the fill site was happy with the information, then that soil was just being shipped without anything else going on.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we have one question here from Dan. In regards to high volume receiving site, does the 20,000 cubic meter limit apply to each individual job, or is it the total amount of contaminated soil over the entire life of the site? Or is there some sort of calculation over time depending on the type of contamination?
Right. So yeah, so good question. So the 20,000 cubic meters is your fill site's life cycle. So that is over the course, if you're taking 20,000 cubic meters. So basically right now you can take up to 20,000 cubic meters of that Goldilocks soil type, right? That fits in between your high density residential and your CL. You can take up to 20,000 cubic meters and you don't have to register as a high volume receiving site. As soon as you're over that 20,000 cubic meters, now you're a high volume receiving site. It doesn't matter where that soil's coming from. That it's what you've taken on your site, and that's what makes you a high volume receiving site.
So even if it's clean, like if you have a say receiving site or dump site that only receives clean RL or agriculture quality, still, if it's over 20,000, has to go through that process?
No. So if you're only,
Oh.
so it's only for that soil quality, right? So if you can take as much as you want of the residential quality soil.
Oh,
Yeah,
I see.
that has, yeah.
Okay. So that's the next question is, are water sewer installation site exempt from the Schedule 2 triggers? That was the question I asked you before.
Yeah. So there is a difference here between what the notification process and the high volume receiving site. And I think there still is confusion out there as to where does one stop and the other begin. So like a water sewer installation sites, for the most part, my understanding, those are going to be happening within roadways, right? And so general roadways are not considered Schedule 2 land uses. Therefore, if you're taking soil out of there, you're basically just needing to satisfy yourself as to whether it's contaminated, so it should be going to a treatment facility, or if you're clean, then you're just sending it wherever you would normally send it. You're not following the notification process because you're not a Schedule 2 use, right? So that's your trigger. So really, utility installations, they're not really going to have to worry about this notification too much. Now, if you're doing utilities on a site with a Schedule 2 use, some kind of a large industrial property that's upgrading utilities, yeah, if you're shipping soil, you are going to have to follow the notification because it's coming from a Schedule 2 site.
Okay. The next question is, hi Travis, great presentation. Is receiving site on federal land still exempt from notification? And maybe you could add the First Nation land to this as well.
Yeah, so a federal site, so something like the port or other types like DFO properties, if they're owned by the federal government, considered federal properties, then you don't have to file a notification if that's where you're sending your soil. So that's easy. So First Nations reserves, they are included in this. So if you're sending soil to a First Nation, you will have to file a notification. Yeah.
Okay. Presumably, can permitted facility make their own choice on how to receive soil with no soil exceedance, but only raw soil vapor exceedance?
Yeah, so Claire, I'm assuming you're kind of meaning you are permitted to take waste soil, and so therefore, yeah, okay. So yeah, if you're a permanent facility, so you're already allowed to take contaminated soil, then yeah, I think you could make your own decision as to that you want to take soil that's just got some raw vapor exceedances, because that's the problem here, is that the ministry is going to say raw vapor in the ground means your soil is technically considered contaminated for the purpose of soil relocation. Doesn't mean it's contaminated for that site, but for soil relocation. But that's not going to matter if you're shipping that soil to a permitted facility that can take waste anyway. So I think that would be fine.
Okay, the next question is, if we're building a new subdivision in a previously forested area and need to export, say, 30,000 cubic meter, do we need to do this testing?
I would say no, and that's because you're not taking it from a Schedule 2 area. So there's no trigger for you to do that soil assessment. Now, that brings up an interesting point, and it's something I think, fill sites and then soil shippers should probably start discussing is, now that there is an actual, or there's going to be a very formal protocol for how to assess soil for soil relocation, even if that's not meant to be applied to non-Schedule 2 uses. My concern is that that's where fill sites are going to start turning to say, oh, well, we don't care that you're not a Schedule 2 use. This is how we want soil assessed before we're going to accept it. And that could draw, sites like that subdivision into this process, whether formal or not. You're still going to be going through that cost of doing that soil assessment. So I don't want to see that happen. I'm just, we already see fill sites sometimes saying we will only accept agricultural quality soil, even though it's clearly an industrial fill site. So we have already seen fill sites be super conservative on the soil front, and I'm worried that this could lead them to follow this as well, even though it's not meant to do that. So, fill site operators, if you're out there listening, please be gentle with us here as we roll this out. I think it's pretty conservative already how we look at soil for fill site acceptance. So do
you think they would increase the sampling because right now they're already asking for phase 1 environmental analysis before you take material to their site. So do you think now they might ask for the frequency as that table that you had?
Yeah, they very well may, and I mean we see a lot of variability in what fill sites want right now for frequency. I've seen as small as one sample per 250 cubic meters. I've seen them up to one sample per 5,000 cubic meters, and then I'd say the average is something like one every 1,000 cubic meters they want to see tested right now. So where that falls, I don't know. That they might just pick the one that says one every 2,000 is good enough. That would be nice, but I don't know what they'll do.
Okay. And the next question. This includes historical schedule to land use, not just current, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. If your site had a Schedule 2 use on it, you're going to have to be in the notification process.
Okay. So anybody else have any other question they would like to ask? Oh, okay.
And feel free to just turn on your mic if you just want to shout your question out. That's fine.
Yeah, if you want to ask question, you can. I think there's a raise hand, or you can. I think you can turn on. You can unmute yourself. So if you want to do it, we just didn't want everybody to do it at the same time. But
looks like Guy had a follow-up question there, including if it was remediated. Yeah, so that's a good point, Guy. So some sites have spent a lot of money cleaning up their property, and in fact going out and getting a certificate of compliance even for their properties, and that's allowed them to go ahead and do development and rebuild and everything else. Unfortunately, it does not get you out of this new system. You can have a certificate of compliance for the site, but that's not an exemption from having to file the notification. If you had that Schedule 2 use on your property, even if you've gone through and got a certificate of compliance, then you're going to have to file this notification.
Okay, and then we have.
Thanks, Albert.
Yeah, very informative presentation, Travis. Thank you. So I just wanted to add, in case you have more questions, you have Travis's contacts there, and we are recording this presentation, so we will share it with people who have participated. And if you need to get those tests done for your sites, or in the future, need to fill out that form, need help with, contact Travis. He's an expert on this, and I see Hwayda just added all the contact information as well. And if there is anything else, I think we can wrap this up. Just wait for a couple more minutes if anybody has any other questions. You can also contact Hwayda if you have any need with your presentations, your own presentations for your company or websites or marketing, any of that. She's amazing for it. And somebody has another
Claire,
question.
Yeah.
Yes, go ahead. We have until 1 p.m. So if anybody has questions, we can stay until then. Claire.
Yeah, you can just speak it out if you want, Claire. Yeah, you can hear it.
I was just thinking it'd be easier. And I apologize, this is very specific to GRT's position, so if other people want to have questions first, I don't want to hog, but I also have a very curious question. All right, so GRT is situated on port land, so we're exempt from clients having to notify when they send us material. That's clear.
I think so.
When we process the material and clean it, we usually aim for park land use standards on our cleaning before we send it off-site. So we have material that is park land use, and it's well characterized. We are characterizing with enough samples per unit measurement, in compliance with the future soil relocation rules. We are ourselves a Schedule 2 site. Just our operation constitutes a Schedule 2 use. So we are a Schedule 2 site. There, we are doing the sampling that is required for Schedule 2 sites, even though we do it for different reasons.
Right.
Am I correct that if we meet all of the criteria, like we're below that high density residential land use standards, then we do not need to notify the final receiver of the material?
That's a really interesting question. It is very specific.
Well, we don't fit a box, right?
Yeah, it is interesting. I mean, when you look at the exemptions for filing a notification, they're not based on the quality of soil. It's just
based on Schedule 2.
That's right. It's based on, do you have a Schedule 2 and are you shipping more than 30 cubic meters?
So that's what I understood it to be before. So I think we will be sending notifications about every person who buys our aggregate or uses our materials. But yeah, so the quality that we send it out as is sort of irrelevant. Well, I mean, it has to meet the standards of their land use. That irrelevant in the eyes of the soil relocation rule, relevant in terms of all sorts of other regulatory requirements, but irrelevant for soil relocation. The only relevant aspect is that we are a Schedule 2 site.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like your soil would already meet the low impact, land use already quality. So therefore,
just because of our own internal operational,
Yeah, it sounds like you're probably already also going to meet the frequency assessment. So, it's just going to
set our frequency to meet it. We decided early on when this first came out that we would set our frequency to match that, just so that we already had operational procedures in place for that. So that's good too.
Yeah.
So then, it's just adding the notification step.
It's just a paperwork
notice. Correct. But 14 days, is that? Forgive me if I missed that.
7, 1 week, yeah. And I think we're 1 week in advance. Yeah, you'll have to file that notification. I think what might get annoying for you is all the receiving site information you do have to collect for those notifications. Like land title, full contact owner, and then the whole map thing as to where they're going to put that soil. Now, maybe it becomes as simple as this. That's not relevant for your business use because you're providing stuff that people are going to either mix into concrete or use as a base layer for structural design. Whatever, right? So maybe that's something that just comes down the line from the ministry is there's a clarification that no, you don't have to provide a map because you can't really say where that client is going to use that soil because it's not really a receiving site.
You give them excellent credit. I hope that happens. To date, the conversations have been the reverse of that. They have been, you now need to find out exactly where they're using it, or you can't give it to them. You can't sell it to them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we will hope for a change in that policy then.
Yeah, it seems to restrict regenerated aggregate, and I do think
I would think so. Yeah.
As a society, we're moving towards regenerated aggregate, so
it'd
be nice to have the rules that reflect that. Okay, thank you very much. That was really
helpful.
helpful.
Thanks for the question.
It's good. And another thing I wanted to add is, as for Fill Connect, as some of you know, we try to connect sites that have excess material to the ones that need material. In our listings, you can upload all the information for the test you've done. If you're a receiving site, you need to upload what kind of receiving site you are, and then if you're have excess, if you have done the testing, you can upload all that information in there. And of course, for clean material that is not scheduled to or contaminated, nothing has changed. So we still can connect with other sites and try to reuse the material as much as possible. So keep doing that and adding your projects to the map. And yeah, I think that's it. If nobody has any other questions, we can wrap this up. And thank you so much, Travis.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you, man.
All the really useful information. Definitely help us a lot. And if anything changes again, please come back. And
Absolutely,
we'll have another one before March if anything significantly changes.
Yeah, if something if there is a lot of information that does actually come out in those ministry webinars coming up later this month, then for sure I think we should do another. It might just be a quick one, but yeah, it'd be good if there is some help out there. But I think regardless of whether we do another webinar, I think we probably want to do a blog post or something, just to say nothing new came out of it.
Yeah.
We're still waiting for March 1st, so yeah.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Good stuff. All right. Thank you.
Okay.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.